Good evening, Hist711. My name's Christopher DeLaney. I'm so excited to be part of this class, and this is going to be my first video submission for our discussion post, which is, the extent to which Western civilization is actually still, relevant today. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys so you can see what I'm looking at. Let me see here. It's been a while since I've had to do this. And I think that should do it. Let me put that a little bit larger. There we go. So Western civilization, the relevance of study in the modern world. And I think before we go ahead and delve into this topic, as we do with any topic, I don't think we should just tackle Western civilization. Let's just look at what a civilization is to begin with. So before dissecting Western civilization, one must consider what constitutes a civilization to begin with. And I think there's just this large misnomer about what civilization actually is. When I go ahead and teach my AP World students, I've been teaching that for about 20 years now, my students there really get confused that a civilization somehow, is construed into being civilized, and they kind of really can't separate those two terms, being civilized as opposed to civilization. Looking this week, there's a lot of articles that we read on civilization, Western civilization. I think Birkin, did a really good job in his article, What is Civilization?, when he argued that a civilization may be regarded as the largest cultural unit about which a linear history may be written. And I made that with bold because this week it's so important to look at Western civilization when we look at the different definitions of Western civilization, that it's a linear history. It's a history that you can really just connect, the present or, its termination, to where it began. And I wrote down here too, I underlined that concept of, it being written. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a written history, in my opinion, but a civilization is something that I feel that is created by historians, looking back onto, these past civilizations. So whether written or not, I think the civilization is always more well defined, I guess, the further we get from it. So now that we understand a little bit about what a civilization is, I think we should look at what is Western civilization. And then again, I'm going to go back to Birkin here. He also says that this is a hard term to define, and he really kind of lays out throughout his article two major definitions, and you lose a lot of the different historiography to, prove those points. There's an expanded definition and a restrictive definition. The expanded one was centered on the Mediterranean world, starting with the Greeks through the Roman Empire. And then after the Romans fall, we get to what, some historians call the Dark Ages, but the early Middle Ages, there was this little bit of a break. And then Western civilization broke up into, three different other civilizations, that's going to go ahead and be, basically the Dar al-Islam, right? The Islamic world, the world of the Byzantine Empire and, Orthodox Christianity, and then Western Christianity, the Western Christendom. We're looking through some of the historiography there. A lot of historians are going to place a lot of emphasis on that Western Christendom, but really not so much on those other two subsections. So really Birkin, and I kind of feel the same way, that a restrictive definition is a little bit more appropriate in defining what a Western civilization, actually is. And that starts not going back to those, classical Romans and Greeks, but instead starts with the Western Christendom that comes, right there after the early Middle Ages. And it's so important when we look at what is a civilization to begin with, as we did on this slide. It's that linear history. When you look at that expanded definition, as I go a little further here, it's just simply not linear. Which gives a little bit more evidence for that, restricted definition as opposed to the expanded. So just so you see this little bit of a map, you guys can see in the green, some of the extents of what we're looking at as the Islamic territories. The Byzantine Empire is actually going to spread later on, into that more Orthodox Christianity that's going to spread a little bit through Russia after the Mongols leave. And then we have, the Western Christendom, which you kind of see in the purple and the red here, which is also, though, going to, differ later on, as Catholicism, I should say, leaves Great Britain, and Protestantism is going to go ahead and move into that region. But it gives you a little bit of a definition there, a little bit more of a visual. And then if you're still looking at Birkin, he suggests, as we move away from that, expanded definition, that, look at the concept of studying, this ancient world through a classical world, and that would be more Rome, all right, and ancient Greece, which, still some term as Western civilization, and then versus Western civilization, which is, basically the world of Western Christendom. So then why the restrictive definition, right? Birkin also argues the need for an introductory course on several sections, one on classical world, other one's Africa, third on China, and all these different items. I think that's a cool concept. When I teach, my AP World course, it's kind of the way that we do it as well. We look at, Chinese civilization, Indian civilizations, Swahili city-states, and we look at civilizations independently, which I think so much can be gleaned, so much can be learned from studying these different civilizations, because they are all unique. But at the same time, I do typically differ a little bit with Birkin here, because I do think they also need to show the interconnectedness of these civilizations. They don't each exist in vacuums. They're constantly in communication with one another. They are trading with each other. So much is shaped and passed down from one civilization to the next. I mean, if you're looking just at what Islam, has gone ahead and kind of retaught the Western Christendom of what they lost, after the fall of, the Roman Empire. These civilizations are connected, but Birkin has a lot of merit to the concept of looking at it, as an individual, study, and to study all these different civilizations, especially early on in, students' history studies. So that kind of leads me to some of the other readings that we did this week. Now that we know what a civilization is, and what the definition that we're going to use here for Western civilization, how does one actually study Western civilization today? And I think that's why I want to pull in Hannon, the book that the refreshing book that we started to read this week, The Inventing Freedoms, How the English-Speaking People Made the Modern World. And he really suggests that, at least when you're looking at Western civilization, okay, what he kind of terms the Anglosphere, that three things are really going to pull it together, studying the same language, the same hymns, and the same ideas, or the ideals, of those civilizations. And I kind of want to just take and look at that a little bit more, because that's kind of, really interesting for me this week. He quotes Rudyard Kipling, which I pulled in here: "The stranger within my gate, he may be true or kind, but he does not talk my talk. I cannot feel his mind. I see the face and the eyes and mouth, but not the soul behind." And this is really starting to look at the concept of the shared language, that Kipling, this British poet, is going to go ahead and really say that there's so much to be said for speaking someone's language, that it binds people together, and it kind of fosters this unification, this concept of trust within that same language. I do caution, though, a little bit here. I do use Kipling a lot in my own classes. We don't use this poem, but I do use The White Man's Burden. How does that go? If I can do it from memory: "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bond your sons to exile, to serve their captives' needs. They wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. They're new caught sullen people, half devil and half child." And we look at that concept in my world history classes of half devil and half child as it related to imperialism, which ironically, is really some of the early definitions of, the concept of Western civilization is coming out of that time period. So, while Kipling here uses, I should say, Hannon uses Kipling as a good argument, for that shared language. Some historians have actually used some of Kipling's work, as being very, Eurocentric, especially during, the height of imperialism. What is that, about the 1890s or so? So I just kind of want to look at that to caution those. So also not just shared language, shared hymns Hannon looked at, and he refers to that as a shared Protestantism, within that Anglosphere. We don't necessarily look at it as literally the same shared hymns from a hymnal, not in the purely literal sense, but the shared Protestant upbringing that rejected, the ideas of Catholicism, in the fact that, there shouldn't be an intermediary that really stands between God and the individual. Some of the roles of the church, were really questioned at that point. So those shared Protestant upbringings, has really promoted a population that was more free to think and act as individuals and less guided from a I shouldn't say a higher power, but from a higher authority, okay, from a higher government. And I think that's what we really look at with that concept of those hymns. The Protestantism leads individuals to question. Hannon states Protestantism was understood primarily in political rather than theological terms as a guarantor of free speech, free conscience, and free parliaments, which we're going to obviously look into more into this course, being that this is exploring freedom and liberty. We're going to look at those. My computer just beeped before this slide. I just want to make sure, guys, as we're getting into this, that something didn't happen. I am still here, stay in this call. Just making sure I don't get signed out. That would be terrible. Okay. So same language, same hymns. Hannon also discusses the concept of same ideals that refers to this shared culture of ethics. The people in America, in the Anglosphere, have an extreme distrust of standing armies. You can look at that with the Revolutionary War, as they view them as, being a roadblock to liberty. Both the American and the British constitutions have a shared belief of constitutional freedoms that they're going to go ahead and term a folk right, free elections, free press, the whole concept here of the right to a fair trial. All of these are ideals that are shared within the Anglosphere, that are going to go ahead and be shared within Western culture as we move forward. And that's one way to go ahead and study this concept of Western culture as we, get a little further here. So what is civilization? What is Western civilization? How do we go ahead and study it? Let's look at why the study of Western civilization is still relevant today. We have Appiah here. The article there is No Such Thing as Western Civilization. They are going to argue that there's really little need to study Western civilization. I mean, some do really make that argument. They trace the emergence of the term Western civilization, as I stated earlier, to the 1890s, the height of imperialism, right? And imperialism, obviously, with that negative connotation to it for a lot of historians, especially, over the, the last 30, 40 years or so. You are looking, at the concept there of Western civilization as trying to prove European superiority, as opposed to looking at European just uniqueness as a whole as a civilization. Appiah says culture, like religion, nation, and race, provides a source of identity for contemporary human beings. And like all three, it can become a form of confinement, conceptual mistakes, underwriting moral ones. Social identities connect the small scale where we live our lives alongside our kith and kin, with larger movements, causes, and concerns, but our lives must make sense too. And on the largest of all scales, we live in an area in which our actions in the realm of ideology, as in the realm of technology, increasingly have global effects. And I leave you, with this last sentence, when it comes to the compass of our concern and compassion, humanity as a whole is not too broad a horizon. Appiah really tries to make the argument, that Western civilization should not be really studied as, as a whole, and rather wants to look at human civilization, not looking at the smaller civilizations, like, Birkin, that we looked at earlier. With that said, though, on the other hand, there's still a lot of merit for viewing humanity on a global scale, and I believe this, with similar traits and desires. There is still a uniqueness, as I said earlier, to the world civilizations, including the West, that should have their own merits of study. They should have their own field of study, within history. Many believe that constitutional rights, democracy, civil liberties come with industrialization. They come with wealth. They come with stability. It just happens naturally. But Hannon really makes the distinguishing, factor that it's the context of earlier parts of the 20th century, that really prove that not to be true. That, just because a nation is industrialized, a nation is wealthy, that they're going to go ahead and develop democracy, an ideal of Western civilization. It's just not the case. I mean, look back at, the 1900s, look at the 20th century, and look at, the rise of fascism, the rise of communism, the rise of these totalitarian dictatorships. You're looking at the discrediting of democracy in light of these totalitarian regimes. We look at it today that some nations move towards democracy, but when you're looking at the concept of this Western world, being the center of trade, rebuilding after World War II, things like that, there's nations are making the strive and the push to align themselves with some of these different Western civilizations, in the Anglosphere. So, it just can't easily be said that nations would move that way on their own. Rosenthal, Pubule, I'm going to try that one on oh my gosh, that's a hard one for me to say. I'll just say Rosenthal. His article, The Reflections on Ancient and Modern Freedoms, elaborates on that. He elaborates on, that restricted definition that we defined earlier. He calls it the modern liberal understanding, but pretty much it's one and the same, is that the freedom to think, the freedom to question, the freedom to learn, and the desire to limit the power of the state through laws and constitutions is really what Western civilization is. And it's really an area of study that has to happen, to have its moments as it is unique. And I kind of look at that concept, if you prescribed the theory of tabula rasa by John Locke, that the individual is a blank slate, that they're born with nothing and that they build upon their knowledge through their experiences, through their thought, through their schooling. If you believe that, just because you belong to a Western civilization, or doesn't mean that these ideas are just going to automatically be instilled into you. I was born in America. That doesn't just mean that I'm going to have this strong sense of liberty and freedom and democracy. It's something that needs to be studied and needs to be appreciated. Just because one may be part of the Western civilization does not mean that they will perpetuate its morals and its character, which is kind of what Royal Roberts was arguing, and who put the West in Western civilization. He explains that civilization is not something that we simply inherit or ever finally possess. Each generation, individually and collectively, needs to make a continual effort, all right, to appropriate it anew, because a civilization is not passed along to us at birth. A civilization is an elaborate structure of ideas and institutions slowly built over time by the intelligence and effort of countless individuals working alone and together, which I thought was an amazing quote here to put in here this week. So why is the study still, like I said, why is it still relevant? When reading Robert's article, the relevance of Western civilization studies in the modern world is just made clear. That even though Western civilization is attributed, to a lot of shortcomings, a lot of atrocities, okay, I don't know, World War II, the atomic bomb, slavery, what have you, imperialism, he puts it so strongly to some eyes, there is no better champion for justice, fairness, liberty, truth, and human flourishing that exists than the complex and poorly known entity that we call Western civilization. Western principles remain our best hope for a more humane world. And that, my friends, is why I truly feel that Western civilization is a relevant course of study. Why is it relevant to understand today? It's also important to understand what a civilization is, what a Western civilization is, looking at, the different definitions there, more of a, an inclusive and more of a restricted, looking at the language, okay, the hymns and the ideals, all right, of how to study it, all right. Some of the opponents of, who think that we should not be studying Western civilization, but ultimately, I think it needs its due time to be studied, to be learned from, as it does provide a unique view. Guys, bibliography here. This is my bibliography. Obviously, I'll have sources that are posted, and I'll also see if I can post this slideshow too, if that's a possibility. We'll find out. So let me go ahead and get out of this and get back to my beautiful shining face here. Let me stop presenting. That should be there. There we go. So this was a really fun set of reading this week. I look forward to doing some more. I look forward to watching all the videos that you guys go ahead and post, and I'll be commenting on those discussions shortly. All right, guys, enjoy. We'll talk soon.